am. That's the kind of jerk I am. Being a jerk to people? I bet we could put a more positive spin on that. Offering people opportunities.
Right.
Huh? Superpower.
Opportunities to succeed.
Yeah, that is my superpower. I believe Ketchum's here today, yeah. It looks like Jimmy maybe too.
Yeah.
And CJ. I don't know how to mute this, so everybody's just going to hear my random stream of consciousness. Or I could take it off. Oh, and Lily's here too? Nice.
If you're ever curious and you want to turn it off, the button that says on off is a good way to do it.
Well, so I didn't know if that like disconnected it from the, because we were at DerbyCon and we turned off the mic and it like broke everything. They had to start all the stuff from the beginning. And poor Bernstein was like,
Yeah, he was Bernstein. See, that's how to break it right here. Let your computer go into sleep. Yeah, come to the presentation with 10% battery power drain. No, that's good. No, I'm there too, but you know, they were always like, hey, anyone have a battery cord? I'm out of power. It's just at the beginning of the session. No. So you do know this is recorded, right?
yes, sir.
Marisa, identify yourself. All right. Class finished early. You missed the brownies.
His wife, Jeff's wife, is an amazing baker. I mean, yeah.
So I'm told.
She could go into business and make a lot of money.
There's a lot of things I'm being serious. There's a lot of things she could do. She make a lot of money. She does painting. She does craft. She does. And she says, "Now I'm not going to sell anything I make." Fine, I'll just continue working. Technically, you can't bring food into the hotel. nothing. I said, brownies it is. Because she said,
There's
those
no
are the
bad.
easiest things
Right.
for her to make.
There's no wrong answer, so.
She, the most difficult ones are the cheesecakes with the candy.
Those are the best ones. They are the best ones. But there's no wrong answer. She makes these like cheesecake cupcakes, Marisa, with a layer of brownie at the bottom and then cheesecake on top in its own little.
Or she'll put like a Reese's Pieces in there.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Cheesecake cupcake with a brownie ball. Good lord. I'm not even a sweet person, and that sounds
Yeah.
good.
No more than Justin. Check these specimens in. So check it in. Cool.
Yeah, but this is actually good showing for this track so far. It's a big, tall bean.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, echo, I can tell.
There's a whole room.
Now the hooded character in the back,
Huh?
that's all he does. Part of me thinks he's waiting for someone to notice. But I would recognize that. At $215, I'll let you do that.
Okay.
I take no more than 30 seconds.
Okay.
And if I can, I'll just use the handheld and make it
Sure.
stick. Are you depending on Wi-Fi for
Yes.
this? Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no live demos in the day.
Oh no. Yeah, no, no. You know that already. I trust the design. We should have put prosperity in here. It's slow this time. No, we're good. We're fine. Use that. The potty dance at the end is what really. Oh, okay.
Good afternoon. We are continuing the afternoon of day 2. This is track 1, just to make sure you know, and the session you are in is Shining a Light on Shadow IT in the Cloud, right? This is what you're all here to see, right? Yes? Yes, good. My name's Jeff Rich. I want to just take a minute to, I'm not going to list them, but please thank our sponsors by visiting their tables on the 2 floors. They're, for the most part, the people that make this happen as far as, you know, having the facility and having breaks and making the whole thing work so you don't have to spend a whole bunch of money to come in to hear some great speakers like the 2 we have lined up here for this session. I'm going to let them talk about the decades of work that they've done to get themselves to this point on their own, but I am going to at least introduce them and ask you to help me welcome them. The first I'm going to introduce closer to the screen is Marisa Dyer. They both work at USAA, as you see on the screen. And the second is Jessica Hazelrigg, pardon me. I don't know why I did that. I've known you how many years?
Yeah,
Right.
long time.
Yeah, we
Decades.
Yeah,
I'm not
decades,
that old.
decades. Yeah, I am. I'm approaching centuries for knowing people. And Jess and I actually have done a few things together at UTSA with some certification training classes. So please join me in helping welcome Marisa and Jess.
Thank you, Jeff. And good afternoon. We're super excited to be here. So like Jeff said, we have decades of experience between the both of us, not any one of us, like, we're not that old, that we'll admit to in public anyways. But we're here today to talk about shadow IT in the cloud. First, defining the problem for you, and then maybe some things that you can do in your own environments to secure your cloud environments. So let's go ahead and get started. So like Jeff said, we both work at USAA. I'm the director of the platform threat defense team. So I have a lot of responsibility around securing our network boundaries as well as our endpoints. And one of my core responsibilities is running our public cloud security team.
And my name is Marisa Dyer. If you see here, I've got a picture of my puppy. Fun fact about me, I'm recently married, but I tell my husband that the puppy's cuter, so he made it to the slide, and yeah, my husband didn't. And so I've been at USA for a little over 6 years. I'm currently a cloud engineer on the public cloud security team. So our focus right now is to manage and secure our workloads within the cloud. So that includes legacy accounts, people that have been in the cloud for a little while, or accounts that want to come into the cloud as well, and kind of building that gold load, that safe landing platform for them so that when they go in, it's templatized, they can just go in and do what they need to, and we know it's secure. So within USA, we're working on different platforms to include AWS, Google, and Azure, and so working to secure and manage that. My focus is more on remediation, which is looking back on those legacy accounts and kind of cleaning those up as we go. Graduated from University of Texas at El Paso in 2013 with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and been at USA since.
Very nice. So at USA, we always start with the mission first in any of our meetings, and we thought we'd bring that out for you folks as well. So USA exists to facilitate the financial security of our members primarily being the men and women of the U.S. military. And so on our team, right, we exist to ensure that we are detecting, analyzing, and responding into any cybersecurity event that might put at risk our ability to serve our members. So we just want to share that with you, and that's kind of what helps keep us grounded and keeps us focused on our mission and making sure that we are doing things the right way because it's the right thing to do. So we have an agenda slide for you because someone told me once that all good presentations should have one. So here you go. We'll talk about shadow IT and the cloud. What's the risk when you bring those two things together? We'll give you some solutions, wrap it up, and take some questions. We'll share some examples of shadow IT and shadow IT in the cloud with you over the course of the presentation. These are hypothetical examples, just things that we've dreamed up in our worst nightmare, or as we're getting ready to go on a hunting party, what kind of terrible things can we look for that our users might be doing. These are great things that you can take back to your organizations and go look to see if your users maybe are doing similar types of things.
Because they are. Okay, so what's the whole reason why we chose this topic for this talk, right? A big thing about shadow IT, and then shadow IT in the cloud specifically, is we want to bring awareness. You can't help your organization or your company if you don't know that it exists, then you can't help them if you don't even know what it is, right? So we've talked at a couple different presentations. We've been lucky enough to be chosen for some, and there's been some that actually did reject us. We're okay, we're not that bitter. But this was actually one of the rejection feedback that we received, and I'll read it out. Your proposal sounds immature. You make the assumption that your IT department is unaware of what is being used and downloaded, and somehow your data is in someone else's hands. So if you have any idea, go ahead.
That would totally never happen, right? They were perfectly justified to say, shadow IT is not a thing, we don't need your talk here.
Right, so being rejected for a shadow IT talk with the definition of shadow IT, again, just kind of made us even more, give us more of that drive to be like, you know what, we need to bring awareness to what this is, and then what you can do to fix it and help prevent those issues. So shadow IT is any service
whether it's buying physical hardware or procuring software services, that's done outside of normal channels. And I won't belabor the point. It's basically any IT service that your users are acquiring without any of the proper IT or security or contractual controls in place to make sure that you're not putting your company at risk.
So here we just have some stats. If you know anything about shadow IT, you've probably seen a lot of this before. So knowing that more than 80% of your users are probably using some kind of tool, application, especially like chat tools, things that just make their job a little bit easier without IT or security vetting that product or that tool. And a lot of the times, it's not that these users mean to be malicious or are trying to be. They're just trying to get their work done. And sometimes the process can be a little lengthy to be able to go through IT and say, hey, can I use this? Can you vet this for me? Is this okay? Can I get this approved? And a lot of times I'll see security as the no people, right? We just say no to everything and make sure you can't do anything that's going to cause any harm to the company. So that's understanding that and knowing that these users are just trying to get their work done efficiently is a way to come at this instead of saying like, no, you're just trying to do something that could cause harm. Well, how can we go about this to help you out to actually approve these tools that they're wanting to use so that these kind of stats aren't what we're seeing? And so just some examples, high-level examples of shadow IT, maybe some kind of external device that somebody plugs in, whether it's something they know and trust or something they just found, and they plug it in and now you have no idea what kind of malware they might be presenting to the company and the network. And if somebody's using their own device, what we call BYOD, bring your own device, if security or IT isn't aware and isn't managing that device, now we have no idea if there's any upgrades or updates that can resolve security patches or have any kind of like vulnerabilities that need to be resolved. And so if we don't know that that's there, now there's another risk that's posed to the company and the network. And like I said, there's been a lot of examples of users downloading simple things like a chat site because that chat site just made it a lot easier to talk to somebody, whether it's internal or external, and then they might share code or share sensitive information. And if security doesn't know that tool is being used, we don't have any data loss prevention tools tied into that tool to be able to say, hey, that kind of information shouldn't be going out there, right?
So everybody here knows what the cloud is? Yes, maybe so. All right, just for folks who maybe are afraid to shake their head this way, the cloud is basically someone else's data center where your data is residing. You're processing that data. You're taking customer traffic. It includes IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, infrastructure, platform, and service, or software as a service. And then we have, I think, maybe a separate slide that talks about the shared responsibility model. And this is really key, right, as you're looking at standing up IaaS services where your traditional network security gear has a play, right? You're still going to have a firewall, a web proxy, DLP agents, vulnerability scanning if you're not doing immutable infrastructure, all the way down to software as a service where your controls are pretty much going to be contractual controls, DLP to prevent data from getting out there that you don't want out there, and then IAM controls to limit access. And so we just wanted to throw that in there for folks who maybe weren't as familiar to give you a frame of reference for the rest of the talk. And so Marisa talked about some examples of shadow IT on-prem, right? Things like users bringing their own device or hooking up a Raspberry Pi, as happened to JPL, and now their network is compromised. But what happens when you take shadow IT in the cloud? And this is where we go from nightmares to night terrors for me personally. So when you think about things like a business standing up an S3 bucket, but leaves their private key in that S3 bucket, and for fun, they have no login enabled, so you don't know who's accessed it. What do you do then, right? How do you assume a breach or compromise? Are you revoking those private keys? What's your instant response plan for something like that? Or you have lab accounts that are publicly accessible in infrastructure as a service, and it's cool because it's lab and there's no real data, and users would never ever reuse passwords from lab to production or use production data in a lab environment because production data is just way much better than your lab data or your de-identified data. And they for sure would never ever, I'm sure, use a corporate card to go buy a software as a service or to stand up their own account in AWS or GCP. and then spin up a bunch of resources and never tear them down. So not only do you have resources in the cloud that are unsecured and not being monitored, but now your corporate card bills are just continuing to burn and burn and burn because you've got resources out there taking traffic and no one has any visibility or line of sight into what's really going on. And then even things like software as a service where, here's an example, this is from codesandbox.io, which is a super awesome code beautifier website, right? You can paste in your ugly code, it'll put in all the tabs for you, format it super awesome. Developers absolutely love tools like this. A couple problems with sites like these. One, developers can tie these directly to their GitHub pages, so now your company code is propagating out to their personal GitHub projects, right? And I'm sure they would never hard code creds in that code, so you don't have to worry about that piece of it, but at least like your corporate code is now out on somebody's public GitHub page, you know, for their next job. But then the thing that I love about these is you don't even have to click through the license agreement. This is just like you have to go dig and find their license agreement for their use. Any content that you post to sites like that, this one is specific to codesandbox.io, grants codesandbox.io the MIT Commons license for the software or for the code that your developer just put up there. Not trying to do anything bad, just trying to make their lives easier and be more efficient at their job, right? And so understanding the need of your users and being able to kind of end run around and provide the services they need, and at the same time finding services like these and blocking them from the network, or go procuring a corporate license so that when they are using these services, your intellectual property is protected is absolutely key. Another example of shadow IT in the cloud might be, Marisa talked about chat sites or sites like Asana, the boards that let you organize your work. Those are all super helpful. I love them. I use them personally at home. But the best thing about tools like that is if a business unit in your company were to go, get a contract, do the right thing, get a contract, they're using it for their team, but then they told all their friends, and their friends told their friends, and their friends told their friends, and nobody told security because they just went out and did it without following all the proper processes. Well, now there's no lockdown on how many users can I sign up for that service, and that unit maybe only purchased 10 licenses, but come true up time next year, now you've got 10,000 people using it, and nobody's budgeted for that, right? And then we don't have any, again, IAM controls, so people are inviting their personal email accounts to join your work Asana boards and sharing code that way. So really absolutely critical to make sure that security and contracting are a part of your IT procurement processes.
So again, we kind of alluded to this at the beginning a little bit, is one of the biggest things we want to do with this presentation is bring awareness. So like I said with the one, meme with the face palm, is the biggest thing is when people don't even know that it exists or what it is. So it's knowing that this is really likely to be going on within your company, your organization, and it's something you need to be aware of so that you can protect yourself from it. So again, just another little stat, which scares me, is that your average company is going to use over 1,000 services, and only, to me, 100 is a handful, is known by security or IT. So very, very few of those are actually vetted and gone through the processes that they need to. So it's ensuring that, like I said, you're helping your users get their work done, but then you're using the tools that you need to make sure that you're tracking on all of the different cloud services and providers that are being used.
So what do you do to secure your network when services are so easily procured and developers are going out there trying to get their job done as quickly and efficiently as possible? I think for us, we've had to break SaaS as a separate workflow or separate security flow from IaaS and PaaS. So on the SaaS side, the software as a service side, there are things you can do from monitoring your proxy logs, looking for data sharing or file uploading type sites. Using a CASB, a Cloud Application Security Broker, has been super insightful for us because we are feeding all of our proxy logs into our CASB, and then the CASB is identifying which of those sites from our proxy logs are cloud services, and that allows us to look at how many users are using which cloud services, what's their upload to download ratio, is this just somebody going to a website, or are they actually using the site and uploading data, and then feeding that into a governance process. So we actually have a governance board that reviews all of those sites, brings in the architects, and then reaches out to the business users to talk about, hey, we see you're using these services, but we don't have a contract in place, or maybe we do, but it looks like you're exceeding the number of licenses. Like, how do we kind of get this back within the up and up to protect our data? There's a challenge there in that you wind up in this kind of race condition where everything is a cloud service now, and CASBs are not like the magical panacea, right? It's going to identify KENS 5 as a cloud service because it's hosted on a cloud server. And then every resource that KENS 5 calls is another cloud service, right? And it has no concept of, I only use this one service and all of, these 10 other sites are tied to that one service. And so when you first plug one in, it looks like, oh my God, like my network is terrible. I should just, update my resume and go home. So CASBs aren't like the one and done. I think you could add some additional intelligence if you're also scanning your corporate card data to look for charges on the corporate cards, and tying that back to the data you're seeing in the CASB rather than using your CASB as a source of truth. Because otherwise you wind up trying to whitelist the internet, which isn't tenable for your security organization, nor does it make a beautiful user experience for your users as they're trying to see what else is out there and what new resources could they potentially take advantage of.
Yeah, and luckily for us, there's a lot of companies out there that have already been looking at this. So there's a lot of tools, different types of tools you can use to detect shadow IT. So rather than just going out there and trying to hunt for those malicious links or SaaS applications or websites, there's a lot of great tools that can help you do that. And we've given some examples here. And then when it comes to remediation, like I said, a lot of this is probably going on already. But luckily you can go back and clean it up as long as nothing's already happened, right? And we hope that nothing has. When it comes to this is more on like the IaaS PaaS level, but when it comes to different cloud service provider, most of them have their own native cloud monitoring tools that are really good. The only problem with us, with a big organization, is it's really tough for the person doing the remediation to go into 3 different tools for 3 different providers, right? If you can find something that's cloud agnostic and can go across all 3 or 4, however many you're using, that just makes your life a little bit easier. But again, if nothing else, if you don't have that extra tool, you can always use that CSP's native monitoring tool. And again, we've included some other tools and platforms that are out there today that do a little bit of that remediation. And when I say they do remediation, is they're logging and monitoring and alerting on different configurations that maybe go against certain compliance baseline standards, those kinds of things, whether they define those or you customize and define them yourself. And then they can go in and use CLI or G-Cloud, whatever they need to go remediate on your behalf, or it just alerts you so that somebody can go in and remediate those things.
Yep, so a couple approaches I talked about a little bit. On the SaaS side, you can try to whitelist your internet, but you will hate your life and your security team will hate you as well. So I don't recommend that approach, unless you're on the government side and you really can lock it down. On the commercial side, it's very, very hard to lock down a network to that extent. But as much as you can, apply a zero trust or least privilege model, right, where you are explicitly allowing, especially on the IaaS side, explicitly allowing services and denying everything else, and pushing everything, using service control policies or SCPs in AWS as an example. If you don't want to deploy services in regions outside of the United States, right, have an SCP that actually prevents that, so that you are, as much as you can, limiting what users can do and limiting your blast radius if something were to happen. And then IAM privileges within each cloud provider should be least privilege, right? It should be least privilege everywhere, but just foot stomping that you should carry all of the same on-prem security best practices with you out to the cloud as you're moving to the cloud. Having a CASB has been super helpful for us to get visibility into the software as a service, as well as IaaS and PaaS services that our users are accessing. The CASB also, some CASBs also have some DLP integrations. So for example, if you're a Salesforce shop or a Slack shop or a Box shop, some CASBs will have additional DLP hooks, so they can see not only from the traditional network DLP side the data that's being uploaded, but that they can also look at actions that users are taking, you know, where they're accessing from, how often, what time of day. You know, is a user all of a sudden going in and downloading a bunch of documents from your box instance, which might be something interesting that you would want to look at. So there's a lot of options there. And then having governance around new use cases. So you should take a deliberate approach as your organizations are moving to the cloud. Unless your decision is to lift and shift everything, which is super difficult in an environment that has years and years and years of legacy applications. You should take a hard look at what applications you truly do want to move to the cloud, what makes sense to put in the cloud versus your on-prem data center, and have governance around that process so that as a use case comes forward, an application team comes forward and says, hey, we want to develop this great app, it's going to do X, Y, Z for us. If it makes sense to put it in the cloud, have them go through your IT and security teams, right, and have some kind of process in place to onboard that use case rather than just giving those developers or that team an account to the cloud and, okay, go do what you want, right? It should be like any other on-prem service. If I want a server in a data center, I don't get to just go to the data center and build a server. I have to request it from my service catalog and a support team builds it. The same model applies in the cloud, and that way you have asset inventory and you ensure that all the proper security controls are in place. And then employee training, right? I guarantee you probably more than 50% wouldn't consider CodeSandbox.io or any of those other sites to be a cloud service or software as a service, or even could even have it come up, you know, as in their thought process that, oh, maybe there are license agreements that I'm clicking through and agreeing to on behalf of my company by leveraging or using this website. So employee training there is 100% critical. And then scanning corporate card data, because everybody knows your local contracting department is not the easiest department to get purchases through, and it's way easier to just swipe a credit card to get work done. So scanning corporate card data helps.
And just an extra plug on the employee training piece. One thing that I've seen a lot is as users go into the different CSPs, I mean, cloud's cool, right? Cloud's a cool new thing. Everybody wants to be in it. I get it. And it is fun and it is useful, but it's making sure that these users that want to be in the cloud and have these applications in the cloud know what they're doing and know what exactly it means to stand up an EC2 instance or to have an S3 bucket with certain subnets and groups and firewall groups. I think some of the issues we've seen is that users just aren't truly aware of what they're doing when they stand something up. So they stand up an EC2 instance, they love it, they tear it down, they think it's done, but they don't realize what other things were brought up when that EC2 instance was brought up. And so when they tear it down, all they see is they've terminated that EC2 instance, but they don't see all the other things that they didn't turn off, right? Other things that could be incurring charges. So just things like that, right? I think that that type of employee training is, okay, if you want to be in the cloud, you've got to take this extensive training to at least know what you're doing whenever you do these things.
Mm-hmm.
So as just mentioned earlier, we're going to give you some examples. We don't want to leave you high and dry with just all these night terrors and nightmares. So these are examples of things you can do at the proxy level. Of course, just hypothetical. You guys choose what you want to do with your company or your organization, what suits you best. These are some of the kind of examples of what we use. So at the proxy level, we do have, so you have Shadow IT blocks. It's just like an object group, right? Like I said, you can use tools that tell you and inform you of different sites that have been known to be kind of used for Shadow IT, malicious, or maybe just haven't been vetted across the industry, and so they're still being looked at. So we have an object group where we can just add all these sites to, instead of going in one by one and creating a new policy rule every time at the proxy level. What we do is we just add it to that object list. We already have a rule within the proxy that says, hey, anything that you see within this object group, just block it. I don't care who's hitting it. I don't care why they're hitting it. Just block anything that goes there. But then we kind of take it a step further. Like I said earlier, you know, these users aren't trying to be malicious or trying to hurt the company. They're just trying to get their work done. So we want to help them in return. So if they hit a site that we have in our Shadow IT block, maybe they actually have a use case or they know that it's a trusted site, or they just want to know why they got that block. We take it a step further and actually give them an exception page. And this exception page is detailed to show exactly why they got this block and why they got this block and what they can do if, like I said, they know it's a trusted site. Or maybe they'll see this and say, okay, I won't use that. I don't need to anyway. It was just something I thought looked cool, but never mind, I'll go into something else. And then on top of that, we include these technical details at the bottom that help us on the back end troubleshoot and make sure that that user got the error we were expecting for the reason we expect or we saw. And this helps us kind of dig further into those sites if they do want to get it approved or whitelisted.
And I love, Marissa, that the policy group from the previous slide is called Block Shiny. Like,
all the shiny things. Right. You gotta have some fun when you make these rules. I understand. Another one at the proxy level that I think is super useful is we incorporate Active Directory groups. And so what we're doing here is there's already an Active Directory group created by IAM, owned by certain product owners or managers or account group owners. And these Active Directory groups define who exactly in the enterprise is allowed access to these cloud service providers. So if you're in this Active Directory group, that means that you've already been vetted, you have a reason to be in here, maybe you're a developer for that certain team or that project. So somebody knows that you have the right to be in that group, so they added you to that AD group. Once you're in that AD group, we have a rule at the proxy level that says, okay, if you're in this AD group, then you can get to these different sites, like in this case, portal.azure, ea.azure, all the Azure sites to be able to use that CSP, right? But we don't have to worry about managing each user or an IP or an ACL or anything like that. All we're looking at is if somebody already approved for you to be in that AD group, then we know you're approved to use these sites.
and this one is interesting on the Azure side. If you're using Microsoft Office 365 or you've federated your AD out to Azure AD, all of your users have $300 of free credit to go to Azure or portal.azure.com and spin up whatever resources they want to up to $300. And then they start billing your corporate account, right? They don't prevent the users from going beyond that. They just start billing you. Also, if you've got developers who are using Visual Studio, now it prompts them to build projects out in Azure rather than on-prem. And so blocking or implementing a block like this really helped us lock down all of the rest of IT and security and even my call center folks who absolutely don't need to be going out to Azure and spinning up resources without going through that governance process we talked about. Because Microsoft wants to make all the money they can, so they leave that open for all of your users.
It's a business, they have to. All right. And then at the IAM level, we have a few examples here as well. So this is, again, super high level, but just showing that you can block from your federation side, blocking connections outside of your network, right? There really shouldn't be a major reason why you need external access to on-prem or internal information or sensitive information, right? So we deny all access that isn't within our USAA network. So again, at a high level, just saying that, hey, this user is assigned to this app, which means they have access, but they're not in our zone being the USA internal network, just deny it, and that's it, right? Doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're trying to hit, or even if you're trying to hit something that's publicly available or isn't sensitive information, if you're outside the USA network, you're going to get blocked.
And an interesting point here too, because we're federating access from on-prem to the cloud, we're preventing users to create local accounts in the cloud, which means it makes cleanup a lot easier if an employee leaves the company. And it also helps us control access so that if you move to another team, we can disable your access we can remove you from the AD group and disable your ability to access those cloud environments. So I think federating access through some kind of third-party identity service has helped us a lot rather than trying to manage individual local users and the different cloud providers.
Yeah, good point. And then another one at the IAM level, this one's specific to one of the cloud service providers, in this case AWS. So if you know a little bit about AWS, they have an IAM rule that you can use called a service control policy, and Jess kind of mentioned it earlier. So these SCPs can do all kinds of things at the IAM level, and again, at a higher level, to where you're not having to get too specific with the rules or spend too much time on customizing this. So this service control policy specifically is for region restriction. This just ensures that anybody that's using AWS cannot use any regions that aren't US regions, right? So we have like US East 1 and 2, US West 1 and 2, and that's all you can use. Any of the other regions in Singapore or London, whatever, you can't use those, right? So again, high level SCP that you can use to ensure that your users are only within the regions that they need to be in. And there's other great SCPs that you can use that just block out certain services. Say you don't want to use, you vetted EC2 and S3 and you're okay with them using that, but maybe AWS Macy, you're still looking into it, or you don't want them to use it for cost reasons. You can block out those kind of services using SCPs as well.
Yeah, so as you're taking a step back and looking at your cloud program and trying to build a security program around it, what we found was that we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, right? There's lots of other security control frameworks out there that absolutely can be extended into the cloud. And so one of the great resources we found is the Cloud Security Alliance's Cloud Control Matrix. It's a free resource. You can go to the CSA's website and download it. But it'll give you all of the control domains, the specific control that you should be looking at, and for bonus points, it ties it back to like NIST or regulatory requirements, which makes it super helpful when the business is complaining, hey, why can't I do this? You can say, hey, go look at FFIEC, this is why you can't do it, right? Other good resources we found, AWS it actually walks through the FFIEC audit handbook and tells the examiners exactly how to test their controls, which means it tells you exactly what controls need to be in place. And at the bottom of that audit handbook, there's a link to a spreadsheet that's super helpful that does the same type of thing, except it enumerates it for all of the AWS services. It spells out what controls need to be in place, and then in the shared responsibility model, what pieces AWS is taking care of for you and what pieces you're responsible for. So, again, don't reinvent the wheel unless just audit and control building is like your piece of cake, in which case, by all means go for it. But otherwise, this work has already been done, so leverage what's out there to help build your security program. And then I think this might be our last slide. So we kind of follow this model for our IaaS control framework. So we determined from the beginning, like I talked about, what cloud services are we going to enable, right? Are we going to allow EC2, S3? We've got no reason to have ground station running because we're not controlling satellites. So at the SCP level, I'm going to block that. So we start off with a cloud service catalog. These are the services that we're going to enable. And then we build out all of the controls that we need to around those services. And that includes governance controls, so focusing on making sure we have the rigor around deciding what's going to go to the cloud and what needs to stay on-prem. And that can be a risk-based approach based on the classification of the data or the potential impact to our members, or regulatory requirements, or even just it costs more to put this in the cloud than it does to host it on-prem. We don't need an internal application for our employees in the cloud when we could run a local web server and serve our employees from on-network. And then we work on preventive controls, so focusing on a granular denial of those services that we're not going to enable. And then and kind of tying that with our binary cloud service controls, the SCPs that Marisa talked about. IAM controls are absolutely critical, right? Making sure you're locking down who is allowed to access the cloud and what actions they're allowed to take. Because, as a manager, sure, I should be able to go in and see what we're doing in the cloud. I should go look at guard duty and see what alerts are firing. But 100% I should have read-only access, right? Because I've forgotten how to do technical work a long time ago. So, making sure that we're applying role-based access control and least privilege policies. Asset management and inventory is critical, not only from a vulnerability management perspective and incident response perspective, to know what you have out in the environment, and what vulnerabilities might exist, making sure we're scanning all the things, but also from a billing and a cost perspective, right? As a unit owner, I should know how many resources I have in the cloud, what my billing is going to look like from month to month, and be able to set billing controls based on what my budget looks like, so that as a business unit, I'm not wrecking the entire organization's budget for the year. And then on the incident response side, having the ability to detect and remediate. In the cloud, the great thing about the cloud is almost everything is API based. So you can build in automatic remediation functions and build them in Lambda, right? Have the cloud do all of your remediation work for you. But that way you're reducing your exposure window to near zero when you're doing that detection and auto remediation to follow. And that your ability to do that really comes from defining what things you're going to allow in the cloud, so that if you're auto remediating something, you know you're not going to break production, right? Because the worst thing a security person can do is go fix a server, which takes down the service, right? And now your customers are not happy. But by ensuring that we're fixing the things that we've said you're not allowed to do, and having that governance review to make sure that this application isn't breaking those policies, if I fix that thing automatically, nothing should break. And even better than that is making sure that you're deploying via a pipeline and having those control checks in place through the pipeline to prevent things from deploying to the cloud in an insecure state in the first place, right? Because if I'm deploying via a pipeline and I've got version control around all of my CloudFormation or Terraform or whatever automatic deployment model I'm using, if I make sure that I'm deploying in a secure state, I don't ever have to fix things in the cloud ever, right? Especially if I'm in production and I make my production environment immutable, I shouldn't have to fix things there. And then detective controls, just in case something does go haywire. And then the assurance functions, so making sure that we're scanning against CIS baselines or scanning against the standards that we have developed, just again to provide that final layer of control and feel-goodness. I don't know if that's a word. It is now. You heard it here first, guys. For your auditors and regulators when they come in and they look at your environment, so that they know that you're doing all the right things and you're checking yourself to make sure all your controls are working.
All right, and with that, are there any questions? We have about a little over 5 minutes, I think, for questions.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So the question was whether we could, if we could expand on our governance process. So I think you saw in several slides previous, when a user goes to tries to go to a cloud service, they get a bump page with a button that says, click here to submit a request to our cloud review panel. And our cloud review panel is really where all of the magic happens, right? So that on that panel sits representatives from legal, compliance, all of our control partners, contracting, IT ops, and security. The folks who are actually going to go build that deployment for that use case sit on that panel. And we evaluate the use case based on all of those different verticals, right? So from a legal perspective, are we good with the terms and services? From a contracting perspective, is all the paperwork done? Have we done our due diligence, gone out and looked at that vendor, looked at their third and fourth party relationships, all of the controls that they need to have in place in order for us to trust them with our members' data. From an IT ops and security perspective, do we have, if they're asking to use a service like EC2 and we have that service catalog available, we've already built the controls in place, sure, we can take it on, right? But if you're asking to use something that we've never heard of before and it was just announced at reInvent yesterday, hey, sorry, you're going to have to wait until we look at it and put security controls in place for it. And then from a bandwidth perspective, because we work in an agile model, so it might be something that we want to use for EC2. Okay, great. Now you need to prioritize in our backlog, right? Where does your use case fit with all of the other use cases for the company? When do we need to implement this for you? Because we're not going to give you the keys to the kingdom and let you go develop in the cloud in a production environment on your own. And then we require annual refreshes, right? So come back to the review panel every year and let us know how it's going, right? Are you still using those resources? Can we tear that account down if you're not using it anymore? If your contract is coming up for renewal, we ask that you come back to the review panel so we can review any new terms or services that have been added. And then we also have options in there to allow for use cases that are just in pilot or trial or test to go through with a little bit less rigor. Because we understand if you're just piloting a service, you're not going to have a contract in place yet. Maybe you don't need a production level environment when a lab environment would work just fine for you.
I think what we've seen governance do a lot for us is ensuring that the user actually needs to be in the cloud or has a real use case for being in there. A lot of times, like I said, it's just the new shiny toy, so they want to be in the cloud, but maybe there's already things on-prem that they can use that can definitely do what they need to do. So we've seen governance kind of make people shy away from wanting to go through that process unless they actually need to.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Architecture also sits on the panel, right? And part of that review is, okay, you're asking for this capability, but we already have 3 tools that do that same thing. You know, unless you have a really good reason why those 3 tools don't work for you, you don't need to bring on a 4th tool. So there's some, you know, financial responsibility or fiscal responsibility built in as well. That was a good question. Yes, sir. So the question was, how do you scan your corporate card data to identify all those cloud services? And he said he looked for like .com in the you know, the charge field as one option. I know you can find the merchant codes and search by merchant code and categories of merchant codes. And there are also vendors that will scan your corporate card data for you. And I'm sure they have, you know, they do all the research then to figure out what those merchant cards are. One really cool vendor, and I hate to tell you about it because I don't remember the name, looks at your corporate card data, looks at your license agreements, and then also ties into your identity provider and tells you how many people are logging into the service. So if you're paying for 10 licenses, but you've got 100 people logging in, it'll tell you that. If you're paying for 100 licenses and only 2 people are logging in, it'll tell you that. So there's some really cool insights you can get when you're looking at combining kind of your cloud services and corporate card and purchase order data. Any other questions? I think we have 2 minutes.
Do you have a recommendation on ISOCS that you use cloud access security broker?
So I'm not going to recommend a product to you. I think they're all pretty much the same. I would definitely, if you're evaluating CASB products, the question was, is there a recommendation on a CASB vendor? I would, you know, do a paper exercise, research who's out there, and then pilot, you know, maybe 3 or 4 of them against each other and see which one meets your needs, right? Any other questions? No? Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you so much.